Coming up on The World Today. Omicron variant drives major surge in South Africa's COVID cases. Germany bans unvaccinated people from shops and bars. US-Russia hold talks as concerns rise over conflict in eastern Ukraine. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. Germany has announced sweeping new restrictions for people who have not been vaccinated against COVID-19. Outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel says unvaccinated people will be barred from many public spaces, including non-essential shops and events, unless they have recently recovered from COVID-19. Merkel also says a nationwide vaccination mandate could be imposed from February 2022 after it's being debated in Parliament. Speaking after a meeting with federal and state leaders, Merkel says the measures became necessary in light of concerns that hospitals in the country could become overloaded with people suffering COVID-19 infections, which are more likely to be serious in those who haven't been vaccinated. Well, in the UK, the COVID-19 vaccine booster program has picked up pace following the emergence of the new Omicron variant. So far, nearly 51 million people in Britain have received their first COVID-19 vaccine, almost 89% of the population aged over 18. More than 46 million have had 2 doses and some 18.6 million have received a booster shot. On Tuesday, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced a new target to offer all adults a vaccine booster by the end of January, which means speeding up the rollout by an extra 1 million doses a week.
Starting to see people who I think are probably anxious about the new variant that's been come across, and we've started to get people coming for their first and second jabs that they could have possibly had months ago, but as people's anxiety is clearly rising, we're seeing a big increase in the number of walk-ins that we have through the centre. The last couple of weeks we're definitely seeing the increase, so there are obviously the changes that were implemented for the over 40s to get their boosters. We've heard of changes that are coming from the Joint Committee of Vaccination and the government, so we know that we're expecting an upturn in people. We've also, through the end of October and November, been vaccinating in the schools to do the 12 to 15s, and we also have clinics for the 12 to 15s here as well.
Meanwhile, the UK government has signed deals to buy 114 million more doses of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines to use in 2022 and 2023. It comes after Pfizer's boss said annual jabs are likely to be needed to maintain high levels of protection.
I think the bottom line is millions of lives were saved. The second line is that what was demonstrated was the human ingenuity and the power. I think we'll be in a very, very difficult position. I think the fundamental structure of our society would be threatened. I think we would be counting trillions of economic losses. I don't know for sure how long the third dose, the booster dose, will last. I'm very confident that it would last at least 12 months, but I don't know that. If we have to make a guess, based on everything I have seen so far, I would say that likely will be needed annual revaccinations to maintain very robust and very, very high level of protection. I believe that we have saved the global economy trillions of dollars. I think it's a strong incentive for innovation for the next pandemic, that people will see that if they stepped up to the game to bring something that saves lives, that saves money, there is also financial reward. We didn't do it for that, but I think it's a good thing that there is a financial reward. We wait to see the studies. We are using very, very small doses. So we want to make sure that we are perfectly safe. The question is, are we going to be effective in those low doses? And this is what we are waiting to see. If the studies prove that these very low doses are effective in these kids, I think it is a very good way to utilize those vaccines to protect them.
Over in South Africa, health officials say the new coronavirus variant has now become dominant in the country and is driving a sharp increase in new infections. Some 8,500 new COVID infections were registered in the latest daily figures. That's almost double the 4,300 cases confirmed the previous day. Here's more on the situation in South Africa and around the world on our COVID-19 Global Update.
According to the World Health Organization, Omicron has now been detected in at least 24 countries around the world. South Africa's National Institute for Communicable Diseases says more than 70% of all the virus genomes it sequenced last month have been of the new variant.
Africa has made little inroads in
The World Health Organization says it's deploying a search team to South Africa's Gauteng province, epicenter of the outbreak of the new variant, to help with surveillance and contact tracing.
We are also working closely with countries to step up response to this new variant. In South Africa, where WHO has already a team working in genomic sequencing, we are deploying a surge team in Gauteng province to support surveillance and contact tracing.
Meanwhile, India has become one of the latest countries to report cases of the new Omicron coronavirus variant. The health ministry says the two male patients aged 66 and 46 years are showing mild symptoms and are under observation. India was to open its airports to all international flights from 15th of December, but that decision has now been suspended. Greece has also detected its first case of the Omicron coronavirus variant in a Greek citizen who had returned from South Africa last month. Officials say the man who has mild symptoms and all his contacts have been quarantined. In the United States, fears over the effect of the new coronavirus strain has risen after it reported its first case in a fully vaccinated person in California. The case returned from South Africa on November 22nd and tested positive 7 days later. And finally, over in South Korea, the country has reported a new record high of daily coronavirus cases. It comes as authorities hold quarantine exemptions for fully vaccinated inbound travelers for 2 weeks in a bid to fend off the Omicron variant.
To other stories, United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has met his Russian counterpart as the divide between Moscow and Washington widens over Ukraine. Blinken's talks with Sergei Lavrov took place on the sidelines of a summit of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, holding in Sweden, where foreign ministers from the group's 57 members discussed key regional security issues. The high-level Russia-US meeting came after weeks of tension, with Kyiv and its Western allies voicing concern over a significant buildup of Russian troops near the frontier with Ukraine.
I have no doubts that the only way out of today's crisis, which is indeed quite tense, is actually to seek the balance of interests. And I hope this is what we are going to do today. Both Russia and the United States should stick to a responsible approach, bearing in mind how important our two states are for the global stability and security, including in the Euro-Atlantic region.
The best way to avert a crisis is through diplomacy. And that's what I look forward to discussing with Sergei. If Russia decides to pursue confrontation, there will be serious consequences. At the same time as we're discussing this, we have shared interests that we are working on together, including a shared interest in Iran not acquiring a nuclear weapon. I will raise the cases of Trevor Reed and Paul Whelan, two Americans who have been unjustly detained for far too long in Russia. Their release is an absolute priority for the United States, one that President Biden raises on every occasion.
The VOA's diplomatic correspondent, Cindy Sane, joins us now from Washington, D.C. for more on this. Cindy, it's good to see you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So it's been days of back and forth of warnings from the US and NATO against any military aggression against Ukraine. What more do we know about this meeting between Blinken and Lavrov? Has it helped in easing tensions?
Well, Secretary Blinken was just asked that very same excellent question at a press conference that he had from Stockholm. And what he said was that it was a very serious, very candid meeting, that there were no polemics or theatrics with the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. And he said that he again had pressed the point that it is now on Russia to de-escalate the situation, to pull its troops back from the border, and that to find a diplomatic solution to the ongoing war in the eastern part of Ukraine that has already left some 14,000 people dead. So it looks like that it was a serious discussion. And as you just played, we heard from Foreign Minister Lavrov, a rather muted and conciliatory response. And Russian news agency is reporting that he also said that if Russia were drawn into what he called U.S. geopolitical games, that it would respond. But that's sort of the usual response. So I guess both sides now are taking this back. Both foreign ministers will go back and talk to their presidents about the meeting.
Well, you heard there Anthony Blinken also listing some other issues. I mean, as well as the Ukraine conflict, Russia and the US are at odds over cyber attacks and the staffing of their embassies after several waves of diplomatic expulsions. Are there plans for more talks, perhaps between President Biden and Putin, to help resolve these issues?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Secretary Blinken just said that he believed that the two presidents, Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin, would be speaking directly in the very near future. So, and Russia has been talking about and wanting to have talks, has been talking about it a lot over the past couple of weeks. And you mentioned some areas of contention, including American civilians being detained in Russia. But there were also some areas of agreement with Secretary Blinken said he had very positive conversation with Mr. Lavrov about the Iran nuclear talks, which have started back up again in Vienna.
All right, then, Cindy, thank you so much for the update.
Thank you.
The defense chiefs of the United States and South Korea say they will review and update ways to deter North Korea after talks with its South Korean counterpart. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said North Korea's missile and weapons developments are increasingly destabilizing for regional security.
We also reaffirmed our shared assessment that the DPRK is continuing to advance its missile and weapons programs, which is increasingly destabilizing for regional security. The United States and the ROK remain committed to a diplomatic approach to the DPRK, and we continue to call upon the DPRK to engage in dialogue.
한미 양국은 글로벌 파트너로서 전 세계 평화 안정 유지를 위해 함께 긴밀히 협력해 나갈 수 있는 방안을 지속 모색해 오고 있는 중입니다. 이러한 차원에서 양국은 우선 특정국의 위협을 상정해 놓고 논의하기보다는 우리의 신남방 정책과 미국의 인태 전략 간의 상호 협력을 모색해 나가고 있다는 말씀을.
Now, North Korean leader Kim Jongun has said his country must be prepared for a very giant struggle next year to continue to make progress in areas including defense, agriculture and construction. He made the remarks at a meeting of the Central Committee of the ruling Workers' Party. Mr. Kim says that while the country still faces economic difficulties, the party has had success in pushing to meet policy targets and implementing the 5-year economic plan he unveiled early this year. The United Nations is appealing for $41 billion to provide life-saving assistance next year to a record 183 million people worldwide caught up in conflict and poverty. The world body says famine remains a terrifying prospect for 45 million people living in 43 countries as extreme weather caused by climate change reduces food supplies. Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, Ethiopia and Sudan are the 5 major crises requiring the most funding.
Tomorrow morning, Geneva time.
And we estimate for 2022 that there will be 274 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. That's up by 17% from 2021. And to give it a different look, it's equivalent to the world's 4th most populous country. We aim through this program to help 183 million, the most vulnerable, again an increase from last year. And for this, we're looking for a record $41 billion for the world's humanitarian needs of the most needy in 20. There are 45 million people at risk of famine worldwide in a selected number of countries where food insecurity is at its highest. And this number is arrived at by an objective estimate led by the Food and Agriculture Organization in these many countries. This is not a subjective judgment, it's an objective assessment of those at risk of famine. It goes through 5 levels of category, of which the 5th is the most dire. And for example, as you no doubt know, we have been saying for some months that there are 400,000 people at risk of famine. They're in that category in northern Ethiopia these many months.
The 2021 edition of the African Economic Conference has opened in Cape Verde with the theme Financing Africa's Post-COVID-19 Development. The forum, jointly organised by the African Development Bank, the Economic Commission for Africa and the United Nations Development Programme, brings together various political and business leaders, policymakers and researchers. Speaking during the opening ceremony, United Nations Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed says Africa cannot recover from COVID-19 alone, as a worldwide unity is needed. She adds that before the pandemic, Africa was basking in sustainable economic growth, but the virus disrupted it.
The theme for this year's conference, Financing Africa's Post-COVID Development, speaks to the challenges and the opportunities we face amidst the global pandemic. While the health impact of the pandemic has been relatively muted across the continent, African economies will take much longer to recover than their counterparts in developed countries. This is partly because vaccine coverage is at just 6% across the continent. Vaccine inequality could cost African countries as much as $14 billion every month in lost growth and investments. The United Nations stands together behind the WHO Global Vaccination Plan to secure vaccines reach 70% of all people in all countries by June 2022. Africa has many fundamental strengths, from its young population and natural resources to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Before the pandemic, Africa enjoyed sustained economic growth for more than a decade. But Africa cannot recover from COVID-19 alone. We need global solidarity, demonstrated through deep debt relief and increased concessional finance. African countries themselves must maximize resource mobilization to enable investments in social protection, infrastructure, and technology. They must also end the illegal outflow of almost $90 billion annually from bad resource contracts and corruption. We need to see concerted efforts to reduce borrowing costs for Africa countries and to engage with non-traditional sources of development finance, including the private sector and remittance flows.
India's capital territory, Delhi, has ordered the closure of schools and colleges until further notice from Friday after the Supreme Court criticised the state government for reopening educational institutions despite poor air quality. The Delhi government last week decided to reopen schools and colleges after closing them for nearly 15 days due to a spike in air pollution. The Supreme Court, which is hearing a public petition over the government's inability to cut air pollution, expressed its dismay over the decision by Delhi authorities to reopen schools and colleges and gave authorities 24 hours to reduce smog levels. A Lancet report last year said almost 17,500 people died in Delhi in 2019 because of air pollution. Another report found that 22 of the world's 30 most populated cities were in India. The Duchess of Sussex has won the latest stage in her legal fight against the publisher of the Mail on Sunday over a letter she sent to her father. The Court of Appeal rejected Associated Newspapers' attempt to have a trial in the privacy and copyright case. Reacting to the ruling, Meghan says it's a win not just for her, but for anyone who has ever felt scared to stand up for what's right. Associated Newspapers said it was disappointed and was considering a further appeal to the Supreme Court. And finally, crowds have returned to New York City's Midtown Manhattan for the 89th annual lighting of the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree, officially kicking off the holiday season in usual fashion. This year's event was open to the general public, in contrast to last year's gathering that saw strict COVID-19 restrictions as virus infection cases soared. The 2-hour ceremony was broadcast live on NBC with a slew of star-studded performances, some virtual, including Carrie Underwood. The night's highlight came when more than 50,000 multicolored LED lights and 900-pound star with at least 70 spikes covered in 3 million crystals were switched on, bringing the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree to life. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shubowale.